Hey guys, just want to do a quick sound check. Can everyone hear me? If you can hear me, just type into the chat that you can hear me. All right. Hey everyone. I'm really excited to see you all here today, and I'm really excited for this workshop. As most of you have already seemed to figure out, there's a chat down below this live stream. Use that chat to ask any and all questions you have throughout the live stream. I'm going to go through, I have the workshop broken down into a few different modules, and I'll try to pause as best I can to answer questions that you have throughout. So feel free to ask things whenever, and if I don't answer it during the actual workshop, my presentation will last about an hour or so, but I'll have plenty of time that I'll open up the floor to you guys afterwards and answer all of your questions after I'm done. All right, let's get started. Let me switch it back over to my presentation. And again, welcome. All right. So we're here today to talk about building your own web app. So my story. So I am also a self-taught web developer. Back in 2008, when I graduated from college, I actually got a unique opportunity to build out a web app and build a startup for one of my professor's friends who was looking to launch a company. I had taken a few programming courses during college, but nothing in web development. But I took this opportunity. I thought it sounded really interesting. And from that point on, I started teaching myself and learning as much as I possibly could about web development. So for those next 2.5 years, I helped my professor's friend successfully build and launch his startup, and taught myself everything I possibly could. And that's how I fell in love with web development originally. From there, I eventually parted ways with that company, and I started doing consulting for various clients for various different companies, which I still do today, building custom web applications for them and for their companies. And I started Self-Taught Coders back in 2013 to help other people like yourselves learn to code, because I think it's just such a valuable skill to have, especially in today's day and age. It only becomes more and more valuable. So why are you here? You might be here to learn skills to land a job as a web developer, or maybe launch a new career, switch from your current career into a new one in web development, which I would personally highly recommend. Or you might be looking to level up in your current position. Maybe you're currently, for example, a front-end developer, and you really want a chance to work on the full stack. We'll talk about that term more in a little bit, but work with all aspects of web developments, not just the front end. Or maybe you want to learn to build and launch your own products. Maybe you have your own startup idea. That's a great reason to learn how to build your own web app so that you can build and launch your own company. Or maybe you just work with technical colleagues and you want to learn to better communicate with them and take a bigger part in technical conversations. Everything we'll talk about today will benefit you no matter which one of these reasons you might be here and listening today. So I like to say that being able to build web apps is like having a superpower. If dabbling in coding or web development is like being the guy on the basketball court that can make the occasional jump shot, then being able to build an entire web application is like being LeBron James. So again, you've probably heard people talk about the quote unquote, the full stack. And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. But basically what that means is having knowledge of how all the different parts of a website or a web app function together. And again, I like to say it's like having a modern day superpower because it lets you create something out of nothing. And in today's age, it really is like having a professional superpower too, with web developers averaging in the US salaries of on average, $85,000 a year. Web developers are highly sought out and they're handsomely paid some of the highest salaries of any profession. And it's for good reason because they build the technology that powers so many of the companies around the world. All right, so what we're going to cover today, the first thing I'm going to go through is how web apps work behind the scenes. I'm going to give you sort of a bird's eye view of how they work, how you can approach a web app and know generally how things are going on, how to identify web apps. And then I want to dive into some more behind the scenes of building a web app and go through some of the fundamental concepts to the actual programming side of things. And I'll walk you through some things in one of my own web apps to demonstrate. And then I also want to give you some programming and productivity tips that I've gathered over my years of being a self-taught coder, because there are just some things that I found that if you take notice of them and you follow them when you're programming, they make the entire experience just that much better. And then finally, I'll show you how to get started building your own app. All right, so first, how web apps work behind the scenes. A web app is like a super powered website. So what defines a web app? How can you identify a web app when you're browsing through the internet? These are sort of the tenets of a web app. They're how the things you can look for to identify web apps on the internet. The first is dynamic information. So does it involve information that's frequently changing or updated, or that's built on the fly, like, for example, an online shopping site? Is there user interaction? Do you, the user, interact with the pages to create and change information or to build and customize things? And is there complex processing? When you interact with the site, can you imagine some relatively in-depth actions being performed behind the scenes to make everything work? Let's take Netflix as a quick example. So you probably know how Netflix works from a user's perspective. Let's say you want to watch an episode of Arrested Development. Great choice, by the way. So you open up your browser and you type in netflix.com to go to Netflix. You might then search for Arrested Development or whatever else you're looking to watch, and then click the episode you're looking for to start watching. But how does all that work technically from the web app standpoint? What's happening behind the scenes? So I like to use the analogy or say that the inner workings of a web app are just like a restaurant. So follow along with me. You walk into a restaurant and you're seated at a table in the restaurant industry, what's called the front of the house or the dining room area. A server greets you, and after you've looked over the menu for a few minutes, you place an order for, let's say, a steak salad. You tell the server and they bring your order back to the kitchen, which in restaurant terms is called the back of the house. Your salad is prepared, and when it's ready, the server brings it back out to you at your table. And every time you make a new food request, be it for a salad or an appetizer or a main course, that order is taken and sent to the back of the house. And it's prepared with previously established ingredients according to a previously established set of instructions or recipe. And then it's delivered back to you at your table in the restaurant's dining room. But the cycle is always the same. Again, someone, you, the customer, in the front of the house makes a request, which is sent to the back of the house. Your request is handled and prepared in the kitchen or the back of the house. Say in the case of your salad, the steak is grilled and your vegetables are chopped and arranged, and then it's returned back to you in the front of the house as that steak salad that you originally ordered. Well, web apps work the same exact way. They're comprised of two parts, the front end and the back end, that are constantly working together to perform all the necessary actions and deliver all the desired results. So the front end of a web app handles the user experience. Just as a restaurant's front of the house is responsible for presenting the user with an expected experience and results, the food in this case, a web app's front end is responsible for presenting the user with an expected experience as well. The desired pages that you see in your web browser, for example, when you go to netflix.com. And note, if you've worked before with HTML or CSS code, you've worked in the consumer or customer facing parts of an app or a website. And that's the front end. Again, it presents the user, the front end is responsible for presenting the user with the desired pages in their browser. The back end, on the other hand, handles the behind the scenes. So in a restaurant, when you place an order in the front of the house, again, that's sent to the back of the house so the desired dish can be prepared. As we'll see in just a minute, when a user makes a request in a web app, for example, to view a specific page, that request is sent to the application's back end to be handled accordingly. So just as in a restaurant's kitchen, or the back of the house is responsible for preparing the food, a web app's back end is responsible for doing all the heavy lifting and fulfilling all the user requests. And just another quick note, if you've worked with PHP code before, you've worked in the behind the scenes part of a website or a web app, or the back end. So while a restaurant's kitchen staff chops all the vegetables and grills the steaks, a web app's back end retrieves data from a database, runs any necessary calculations, and returns that data in a meaningful state so that it can be displayed back on the front end, just as you're delivered your main dish when you place an order in a restaurant. All right, so how does that all play out, for example, when you're browsing Netflix? Let's trace a user request through the Netflix web app to go through the entire example. All right, so you open your browser and you enter netflix.com into your browser. When you do that, you've just made a request to the Netflix web app that says, I want to view my Netflix homepage. Exactly like in the restaurant scenario, you told someone you wanted to order that salad. So the request, back in Netflix, the request is sent to the Netflix app's back end. And all of the data that will ultimately be displayed in your browser, for example, your previously viewed videos, your favorites, or recommendations, all of that is retrieved and organized by the back end, the behind the scenes heavy lifting stuff done by the back end. And then once the back end's performed all those tasks, it sends all that data back to the front end. And at that point, the front end takes all the data and it uses it to render a nice page with the designated sections, for example, featured or popular, trending. So you can click and choose what you want on that nice looking page in your browser. So you say you find something you like, you click it, and the process starts again. If you say, I want to watch episode 3 of season 2 of Arrested Development, you've made another request to the web app. Your request is sent again to the back end to be processed. And ultimately, as you can see, you'll get a new page where you'll get the video player that'll play that episode that you chose. And this is fundamentally how all interactions in a web app work. There's one other important thing to note here. Web apps revolve around data. So whenever you're talking about a web app, like we just talked about a few minutes ago, there's always dynamic or changing information involved. So for example, in the case of Facebook, you have status updates or profiles. Or Netflix, like we just talked about, there's new movies or TV shows being added or rearranged all the time. All of that information that the web app is responsible for keeping organized, all of that information is stuff that the web app is responsible for keeping organized and being able to present to you, the user, in a meaningful way in your browser. And all of that data is considered and visualized as objects. So in a web app, data is represented as different objects. So there's a lot of pieces of information, but all of the pieces of information are used to describe different objects in a web app. So let's take a step back for 1 second and let's take a movie in Netflix. A movie has multiple different pieces of information associated with it: a title, a release date, maybe the time, the length of time that it plays for. But when you think about it, it's the combination of those different pieces of information that represent the entire movie, the movie object. So a movie is one different kind of object that is a part of the Netflix web application. Some other ones, for example, are TV shows or those TV show episodes. Let's take one more step back 1 second and talk about where all this data is stored. So a web app's data is stored in a database. And you've likely heard of databases before. I like to think of a database as essentially a big electronic filing cabinet. Just like a filing cabinet has different folders to store different kind of documents, a database has different tables to store different types of objects. And just like you have multiple folders in the filing cabinet, say one labeled for bills or one labeled for car-related documents, that translates in a database to having different tables that store these different types of objects. So you can imagine in the case of Netflix's database, their database might contain a table to store movies and another one to store TV shows. Here's just a quick figure to depict the analogy. So like you can see on the left, a filing cabinet has different folders and there are different pieces of paper in that folder. So the folder holds the objects, if you will. The pieces of paper represent the individual objects. That could be translated to a database by, as you see, a bills table and different objects inside that table to represent the individual bills. All right, so again, like we've just been talking about, a web app's data is organized around objects. And this is where the term object-oriented programming comes from. It's a term that you very well may have heard of before. It's made to seem much more complicated than it actually is all the time. But all it basically means is that it speaks to this technique or this idea that the flow of data in a web app is thought about in terms of objects. That's basically it. All right, so back to Netflix one more time to sum everything up and include objects in this picture. All right, so you're back in your browser. You type in netflix.com. So you've made a request like we talked about to, oh, I'm sorry. So you've made a request to the Netflix web app to view your Netflix homepage. And the homepage displays, say, movies recommended for you, TV shows recommended for you, and movies and shows you've tagged as favorites. Behind the scene, here's what's happening. The Netflix web app's backend, remember the backend's the part that does all the behind the scenes work, is gathering up all the data it needs in order to display your homepage, those movies or those TV shows. And it's doing that by communicating with the web app's database, where all those objects' information is stored. So after it retrieves the information and organizes it appropriately, it sends it back to the front end, and then the front end uses that information to create the nice looking page with all that organized, all those movies and shows organized into those different sections on your Netflix homepage. And that is in essence how all web app interactions function. So I have one more diagram for you that sort of just summarizes that exact process that I just went through. You're in your browser, you make a request to the backend, then you can see in number 2, the backend communicates appropriately with the database to retrieve any objects it needs, sends those objects in step number 3 over to the front end, and then the front end ultimately uses those objects to render a page for you back in your browser. All right, so that is a summary of how web apps work from a high level, what happens when you make a request, and in general, how information flows through a web app. So in this next section, I want to talk about some fundamental concepts of actually building a web app, of some of the programming. And I want to give you a glimpse into how all this stuff works in the code. To do that, I'm going to go back and forth between this presentation and showing you some of the code for one of my own web apps. But before we jump into that, I want to talk a bit about frameworks. So when you set out to build a web app in today's day and age, you use what's called a web app framework. And you may have heard this term before. And I like to describe a web app framework as being very similar to the foundation of a house. All right, so follow along with me one more time. When a house is being built, the first step is to create a foundation, which is generally a concrete and or metal structure that's built underground. And then on top of that foundation, you can build a house. But without that foundation, if you were to build a house without a foundation, the house would just fall right over. You need the foundation. But with that said, it's what you build on top of the foundation, the house itself, or what people think of as the house, that really gives it its character. The various walls, both inside and out, the doors, the windows, the different building materials. That's the stuff that actually defines the house. Well, a web application framework works in the exact same way. So you use a web app framework as a foundation upon which to build your own web app. A framework is essentially a pre-constructed group of code files that helps make it extremely easy for you to implement all of your common web app functionality. But again, it's what you build on top of a framework that really defines your web app. And for web app frameworks, there are, as you may know, all different kinds of ones, but the one that I use exclusively and that I teach about and I recommend to everyone is called Laravel. And Laravel is a framework powered by the PHP language. It's reliable, it's stable, and it makes programming web apps fun, enjoyable, and straightforward. All right, so let me switch out of this presentation and let's go take a look at one of my own web apps, which of course is built using the Laravel framework. Give me one second here. Okay, let me make sure this switches over properly, and then I'll dive in and show you around one of my own web apps. Okay, this is my web apps code, all of its different files. I have them all opened up right now. Don't worry about it right now. We're gonna head over to a browser where I wanna show you a sample page that I set up, and then we'll come back to the code and I'll walk you through some things. So let's go over to my browser, and let's go to this simple sample page that I set up, this hello page. All right, so I'm not sure if you can see, the text might be it might be pretty small, but I entered in my browser the URL fitl.local/hello. fitl.local is the domain that I'm using to host my local version of my application, this demo application. But the important part of this URL is the hello at the end. That hello refers to this sample page that I set up, that you can see just prints out this very simple message, why hello there. But when I visit this URL that points to my web app, how does my web app know what to display? How does it know what to translate this URL to? Let me head back over to the code and show you. So when you enter a URL, the first thing that a web app does is tries to match it to a route. In web app terms, a route helps the web app translate a URL to a certain action that it's supposed to take, or a certain page, for example, that it's supposed to display. What you're looking at right now is the routes file in my Laravel web app. And this is the file. Don't worry about all the rest of the code. I'll point out some things in just a second. But in this file, you define all of these routes, which help the web app. They're sort of like the roadmap for the web app. They help it translate, okay, when the user visits this URL, perform these actions. So again, we were looking at this hello URL. So let's try and find that in here. And as you can see right here, here's the route definition for the hello page. Don't worry about the specifics of the code, but I will walk you through how everything works and give you a high-level picture, of what's going on. So I enter that hello URL in my browser. The first thing the web app does is it comes here and it tries to find a route that matches. You can see that we have, and it uses, to define routes, you use this route get function. But the important part is right here, this hello piece of text. And what that's saying is when that hello URL is matched, this is what you need to do. And it executes this bit of code, this function right here. And a function is, as a lot of you may know, is just a block of code that performs a certain action. So this piece of code right here says, when you visit the hello URL, perform this function. And inside this function, all it's doing is printing out this string, why hello there, using PHP's built-in function echo. Echo just means to print out a piece of text. So this text right here. So for sake of demonstration, let's go ahead and I can change this text a bit, make that all caps, add some exclamation points. And if I save that and go back over and refresh this page, you can see, there you go, the changes are reflected. So again, this URL is being translated to this route right here, and the web app knows, okay, we found a match, so we're going to perform these actions right here and display this simple message. But this example isn't very practical. As you can imagine, there would rarely, if ever, be a page, a website, or a page in a web app that just displays 3 words like this. So let's take a look at one other page to get a feel for a slightly more complex example. So if I head back over to my browser, I'm going to change my URL to /about. And this loads up the about page for my web app. It's just a simple about page that has, some text describing what my web app's all about. But as you can see already, it's much more complex. There's a lot more to it than that hello page. So how does this work? How does the web app translate the URL to a page that is much more involved, like this one, as opposed to that very simple hello page? Again, it all starts with a route. So let's go back over to the code, and we need to match this about segment. The about portion of the URL is the important part. And you can see right here, this route definition does exactly that. It matches about. But previously, it called a simple function. In this case, we have this piece of text right here, page controller at about. What does that mean? So, as you can imagine, there are a lot of different files that comprise a full web application. The files that act as the middlemen to help organize all the data and prepare things to be displayed for various different pages are what are known as or called controller files. So what this says is load up the controller file named page controller and execute its function named about. The function name comes after the @ sign here. So let's head over to this page controller. I have it pulled up. Again, don't worry about all the specifics. This is what a controller file looks like in Laravel, but I'm going to point out the important parts. You can see almost immediately that we have our function named about right here. So this is the function that'll be executed. And again, this function lives in a different file and has a name, but it's still very much like this simple function that was used to render the hello page. It's just doing some different things. So what is this function doing? It's making a call to this view function and passing another piece of text, pages.about. What does that mean? So one more piece of the web app puzzle. Pages in a web app are rendered using what are called view files. View files contain, as we'll see in just a second, for example, HTML code to help render pages. They use the necessary data and present it in a meaningful way so that you can view something that looks nice and makes sense in your browser. So this is saying load the view file pages.about. And what that actually means is go to the folder that Laravel designates to store all the view files, which if you look over in the left-hand column here is resources, views. Look in the pages subfolder there, which you can see is right here, and then load the file, the view file named about. So if I open that up, you can see that this is a page that has some stuff that might look familiar to you. For example, this right here is just typical HTML. This is the HTML that's being presented on this page, in fact. So if I go back over here, for example, and change this heading right here, this H1 heading tag to be about page, exclamation point, save that. Go back to the browser and refresh. There you can see the changes are reflected. So again, the process is pretty much the same. You enter a URL, the web app matches the URL to a route, in this case, the about route. It sends your request off to a controller, in this case, the page controller, specifically a certain function in that controller, the about function. And that function executes whatever code is necessary. In this case, it's displaying, rendering a view, this about view, to display all of the HTML content on this page. All right, let me switch back over for 1 second to my presentation to go through a few more things, and we'll come back to the code one more time after that. Bear with me. All right, so we talked about frameworks. We talked about how URLs are translated to routes. And we talked about how a page is rendered. All right, so you may have heard this term MVC before. This is another one of those terms in web development world that gets blown way out of proportion frequently. It's simpler than it seems, and we're going to go through it. So what it stands for is Model View Controller. And Model View Controller is just a term that describes a common form of organization for a web app. And Laravel uses the MVC design. We actually just saw views and controllers in action. So you saw how we went from a URL to a route, and then remember that route ref called a controller. And then inside the function in the controller, it loaded up a view to display our about page. So what's the M though? The M is model, and that piece we haven't looked at yet. And I'm not going to go into a ton of details, but I'll tell you that models help the app interact with and retrieve information from the database. So in the case of our about page that we looked at, there wasn't any real dynamic information being displayed. But I'm going to take you through one more page and show you just briefly how models work so you can see the entire MVC picture in action. Let me switch back over to my code. Okay. All right, so back in the browser, looking at my application. My application, this ProgQuest application, is actually a web app that lets people submit programming related questions for me to answer. So if I go to the home page, actually this main questions page, you may or may not be able to see up here in the browser that the URL is /questions. And what it does is displays different programming questions on this page, questions that have been submitted to the application. So again, we start in the same exact place as we did before by taking this URL, questions in this case, and matching it to a route. So let's go back over to the routes file in the application and look for questions. And you can see, I'll pull it out and highlight it here. It's right here. So we have a route, again, that matches this URL segment right here, questions. And as we saw before, this one points to a different controller, the question controller. You frequently have a different controller to handle the pages for every different object type. So in this case, we're looking to the question controller, which handles all my question related pages in my app. And then we're looking at the index function. So let me pull up the question controller. And we're looking here at this index function. All right. So first of all, let's jump right down to the bottom of this function. You can see that there's another call, this view call, this time to a view called questions.index. We'll open that view file up in a second, but you know how a view file is loaded. So as you can imagine, we're going to look in the questions subfolder within the main views folder, and we're going to look for a view file named index to render the content on this page. But before that's done, as you can imagine, we need to retrieve the questions from the database. They don't just come out of thin air. We need to request them. We need to ask for them from the database. And we need to ultimately pass them through to the view so that the view can display them. I'm not going to go into all the details, but this line right here, specifically this question.all, uses a model named question, which helps us interact with the database and retrieve question objects from it. So this call to question.all actually retrieves all the question objects from the database. Ultimately, that's stored in a variable and then passed through ultimately to the index view file. Don't worry about how all that works in detail, but I will show you how these questions right here that were retrieved from the database are used to render this page, the questions on the page. So let's open up that questions index view file. Here's questions index. And you can see at the top, there's a page header. So again, we have an H1 tag just to confirm we're on the right place. Let's remove those exclamation points and add all to the beginning. If I save that, so I alter this. If I go back to my browser and refresh, there you can see that it changed the heading. Okay, so we're looking at the right thing. Great. For organization's sake, different pieces of pages are frequently put into their own separate view files, sort of sub-view files. Partial view files is actually what they're called. So you can see here that this statement is loading up another partial view file called questions. So let's trace this. This should be in the questions subfolder. Then in the partials subfolder of that, if we come over here, we can find that. And then it loads up the file named questions, which is right here. So let's open that. Okay, we're in the meat of it now. You can see what this page is doing is using what's called a loop. And if you're not familiar with loops, loops basically let you take a collection of objects and go through and perform a specific action for each one. In our case, we want to display each one of the questions. So we're using this code. Again, don't worry about all the details, but this code goes through all the questions we retrieved from the database. Remember back here, questions. It loops through them and it prints out this HTML for each individual one. So you can see, for example, here, we're printing out the question's title. And we're printing out its submitted on date. Again, just to confirm, I'll change this text a bit to capital submitted, save that. And if I refresh, you can see the changes are reflected. So let's just walk through the entire process one more time quickly. You enter this URL questions. The first thing, just like before that it does, it goes to this routes file. It finds a match and it heads over to a controller, specifically a specific function in the controller. So in the case of the questions page, we're looking at the question controller and the index function. In the question controller, here we have our index function, and all this code is executed. Again, we're in the back end, so all of the data it needs is being retrieved from the database and arranged properly before it's sent back to the front end, which is the view. So like we talked about briefly, this line here is using this question model to retrieve all the question objects from the database and sending them off to this questions index view. If we look in the index view and ultimately this separate view file here, you can see that all of the questions are looped through and displayed to render this page. And that is the full MVC process, all the MVC components, a model, a view, and a controller in action. I actually tend to like to think of it as MVC plus routes, because routes are a very integral part of this process. All right, so let me head back over to the presentation now. All right. We're back. So we just walked through the example with all three of the MVC components. Here's another quick diagram that I thought might help depict the process just one more time from a bird's eye view, from a high level. So up the top left is where we start. You enter a URL in your browser that goes down and attempts to find a matching route. That route points to a controller, like we saw specifically a specific function within a controller. And that controller uses, going over to the left there, it uses a model, or as many models as it needs, to retrieve information about certain objects from the database. That model, as you can see, leverages the database. It connects, the models connect to the database. So they're what's used to retrieve those objects, the object's information. Then back to the controller, we have the information we need, it's all packaged up, and it's sent over to the view, again, which is now the front end. Before that, we were all in the back end. The routes, the controller, the model, and the database, that's all stuff in the back end. We go back over into front end territory when the controller loads up a view file, because that view file is responsible for rendering the page that you see back in your browser again. All right, so we've gone through how web apps work from a high level. Then we dove into some code to translate those concepts into the programming. And the last big thing that I want to walk through with you is I want to give you some programming and productivity tips that can help you become a better programmer and increase your effectiveness. These are just a handful of things that I've learned over the past 10 years or so that have really benefited me personally. So plenty of them have been shared with me by someone else. But they're things that I've been able to use to make learning to code an extremely enjoyable and rewarding process for myself. So I just want to run through a couple for you. Of course, everyone's different, so you're welcome to take or leave any of them. Some of them might work better for you, some not so much. So the first thing I always recommend for anyone learning to code is to schedule your time, schedule a time to do your coding and stick to your schedule. So ideally, you want to schedule a predictably recurring time slot for programming sessions to do your programming. For example, just a random schedule could be every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 7 p.m. after dinner. Shoot for 2 to 3 sessions a week. The most important thing is to start small, and particularly in terms of the amount of time. Start extremely small in that regard with an easy to complete amount of time, 10 minutes. There's no excuse for not being able to do anything for 10 minutes. So you can definitely sit down and work on something for 10 minutes. It may seem silly to start with so little, but what doing such small amounts and doing them consistently will help you do is just develop those really good habits. Before you'll know it, you'll want to be spending way more time, and you can ramp up your time as you see fit. But if you start with a small amount of time, you'll ingrain those good habits for yourself of consistently sitting down to do your coding every week. And if at all possible, one last note, try to do your sessions at the same time every day. That'll just help make the habits more automatic. I understand that that may very well not be possible a lot of times. But if you can, try it. All right, so we sort of just touched on this too, but focus on making small, consistent progress. I know personally, and I'm sure the majority of you know, that coding can get really overwhelming, and you can run into plenty of roadblocks. And that's exactly why I recommend sitting down for just 10 minutes at a time to start. And again, with that habit in place, that small habit, you can gradually progress to longer sessions and work into a schedule that suits you. But just like you use a foundation, a web app, or a framework as a foundation for your web app, or a foundation to build a house upon, getting that foundation in place of habitually sitting down to do your sessions is super helpful, or I've found it to be extremely helpful for me personally and the other people that I work with. Define and set up your workspace ahead of time in any way that you can. So the key is to remove distractions before you sit down to code. So if you're going somewhere else, for example, a coffee shop, decide that ahead of time. Or if you're setting up a physical space, like in a certain room of your apartment or your house, get that area set up so that you can just sit down and go. And try to remove as many distractions as possible. Like leave your phone either on do not disturb or off, turn off the TV. And the other thing is to open the programs that you need for coding and then close everything else. It sounds silly, but again, I struggle with it all the time. As I'm sure plenty of you have experienced, you're sitting down to do work and all of a sudden you're off on some other site, definitely not doing what you sat down to do. So closing everything else that you don't need for the programming helps. And then whenever you can, use full screen mode. So what I mean by that is display as few windows as you need and try to, if possible, have them take up the entire screen. So they just consume all your attention. So you're focused on, one thing. You're coding. Either likely you'll need your browser open and, a program for doing coding. All right, here's another one. Don't copy and paste code samples. So do you remember maybe back in grade school when you were told, when you're studying this material, try copying it down or recopy your notes or make flashcards. So that action of putting pencil to paper, or in this case, typing out your code as opposed to copying and pasting it, helps reinforce the material and the learning, and it greatly improves retention. And if you're curious, there's plenty of science behind this. And this is also one of the main reasons that I've switched fully to using video lessons in my online courses, and particularly my main online course From Idea to Launch, because you can't copy and paste code from a video. So you get all that great practice from typing everything out on your own. And really just, if you're still in doubt, just trust me on this one. It'll pay off big time as you move forward, actually going through and typing out your code as opposed to copy and pasting it. Another one is to, at least for a few minutes, if you run into an issue, try to solve things yourself first. Just, if something's going wrong, take a second, even just a single minute to stop and think, what did you just do? What could have gone wrong? Give yourself a chance to strengthen those critical thinking muscles that are involved in coding. And of course, don't drive yourself crazy if you're not coming up with the answer after a minute or two. Please, and you'll see in my next recommendation, go forth and Google or visit Stack Overflow. There is no shame in looking for an answer. And I do it all day, every day. But there are huge benefits to trying to work things out on your own first. So I just think it's worth mentioning. And when you're stuck or when in doubt, just try to get more information. This should be your first go-to strategy when you're trying to solve issues or fix bugs in your code. Look at the data. Look at your actual code. Does anything look out of place? try to print out the value of variables and see if everything looks right. And if you gather as much information as you can, 9 times out of 10, the answer is just going to jump right out of you. And another way of gathering information is also going on Google or Stack Overflow, for example. If you're getting an error message, just go Google it, because chances are 99% of the time, someone else has experienced the same exact issue you have, and they've posted it somewhere, and you can use that information that's come from them posting it to help you, solve the issue for yourself. And the last one is, my last little tip or hack is to take breaks. It's another one that, again, some of these, may seem silly, but there are also things that I know even I still forget to do all the time. If you're coding and you start to get frustrated or feel overwhelmed, just stop and take a break. Take a walk around the block, or go into another room and read a few pages on a book, or do some push-ups, go grab a cup of coffee. I can't count the number of times I've gotten stuck and taken a short break only to have the answer pop right into my head mid walk around the block. Your brain is a muscle and it gets fatigued, so it needs breaks. Just like it gets tired too. Just like, for example, your legs would get tired if you're doing a several mile run. But it's just really important to keep in mind that taking breaks can help you get unstuck a lot of the time. And I know that programming can be tough, both from watching other people and working with other people, and from my own personal experiences. So I like to try and give people as many different, tips as to how to prevent themselves from getting overwhelmed, because it breaks my heart when I see people give up because they get, overwhelmed too often. All right. So there you have it. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. There is the core workshop. And I truly believe, and my experience has shown to me, that learning to build web apps is the best path to follow if you want to really get into web development and become a true web developer. And we just covered a whole lot. You now know how web apps work behind the scenes, why you use a framework, and even how you can use a framework like Laravel to build your own web apps. But I can only cover so much in a workshop like this because we only have so much time. So I do want to tell you a little bit more about my in-depth online course, From Idea to Launch, that you may have heard me mention. So From Idea to Launch is the name of my flagship online course. And in the course, I walk you through step-by-step building your own Laravel PHP web application, all the way from coming up with an idea for your app through to launching it on the internet. The course is comprised of video lessons that walk you through the idea process and then show you exactly how to program your app from start to finish. So for example, if you want to land a new job as a web developer, you'll learn all those skills that you need. And I want to emphasize that I focus on skills. Or if you want to build and launch your own web app, the course walks you through exactly that. And in this course, unlike a lot of others, you'll be building a web app based on your own idea. So you can use it to build the exact app you want to build, for example, if you have an idea for a startup. Or if you want to level up at your current programming gig, this will show you, maybe again, you're a front-end developer or just a back-end developer, and you really want a chance at a full stack developer job working with the whole picture, the whole web app picture. And it's really it's been amazing to see people come through and use this course. One great example is one of my students, Ronan, who used the course he teaches English in Vietnam, and he plays this game in his classrooms called BAM, B-A-A-M, that previously, to play the game, he would create these big elaborate PowerPoint presentations with it's basically a trivia game for his students on different topics. So for example, maybe he's running he's teaching them about animals or something like that. He would create these big involved PowerPoint presentations with all different kinds of questions about animals, all the images, and all of this jazz. And the games were really effective, but they took so much effort for him to make. So his idea was to build out a web app that would help him create these BAM games and that he could use, to run in his class, to play in his actual class, and to help other teachers. And he did exactly that. And going through the course, he built his entire app, and a few months ago actually launched it to over 400 users. And both him and a bunch of other teachers over in Vietnam, like in his school and in neighboring schools, are using his application. He said, within weeks of joining from idea to launch, my progress had hockey stick to levels I had never thought possible. A few short months later, and I'm sitting pretty on the app of my dreams with hundreds of users along for the ride. So that was pretty cool. So let me tell you a little bit more about the course itself. So the course it's an online course, and it's self-paced. So you can take it at your own speed. If you join, you get lifetime access to the custom online course interface and the video lessons. And in the lessons, I show you exactly what to do step by step, lesson by lesson. So you never have to worry about what you need to be learning. You can just sit down and focus on learning it. And again, the course is focused on teaching you skills, the skills that you would need to land a job as a web developer, or the skills you need to build your own web applications. And it walks you through, again, creating your entire own app using the Laravel framework, which is what we were looking at earlier. And like I mentioned, it's my favorite web app framework, which is exactly why I created the course using it. And Laravel it's stable, and it handles all the aspects, help you handle all the aspects of building your web app. So you don't have to worry about learning a bunch of different frameworks or even wonder which frameworks to focus on. I know one of the questions by far that I get most of anything is, what language should I learn? What framework should I focus on? So basically, I've made the choice for you. Laravel is fantastic. And if you go through the course, you get to just focus on a framework that's proven to be great, that that is in high demand. There are plenty of great Laravel jobs available, for example. And so the course is self-paced, but if you dedicate, for example, 3 to 4 hours a week on it, you should be able to go through it start to finish in 1 to 2 months. And even faster if you're able to dedicate more time. Let me show you quickly how the content is organized, how the lessons are organized. All right, so the video lessons are divided into 5 different modules. And the modules gradually walk you through building your own app, again, based on your own idea. So the first module helps you come up with your idea. So again, another one of the most common questions I get is, I want to learn how to build a web app, but what if I don't have an idea? So I have a 3-step process that you walk through that shows you exactly how to come up with ideas and helps you make sure that they'll work good as web apps, so that you're setting off to build something that you can be successful with. The second module is your setup. So one of the biggest stumbling blocks, as a lot of you may have experienced, can be getting your development environment set up. And it's another thing I've sadly seen a lot of people give up on coding just because it's so hard to get everything installed and configured on your computer to get going. So I dedicated this entire second module to making sure that you get set up with everything you need, everything you'll need to create your whole application through the rest of the course. And it's a full-blown development environment setup that I help you with. I mean, you'll end up having the same setup that I use to build all my web applications, every day. And in the third module, which is called your basic web app, I'm just, again, the course, I focus so much on teaching you the skills that you need to truly learn web development. So I start out by teaching you how to build a basic web app without using Laravel at first, just so that I can demonstrate some of the things that Laravel takes care of behind the scenes, so you're truly understanding how everything works. But don't worry, I don't make you build out your whole application this way or anything like that. I certainly don't make you waste a bunch of time. We just do a handful of things so you can get a grasp on some of the important, early concepts. And then from there, you move on to building your full Laravel web app. And this is where I teach you everything you need to know, step by step, lesson by lesson. All you have to do is following along. We go through planning out and designing all your app's pages, to designing and creating your app's database, and then building out all those pages and adding functionality for users to register and log in. We cover everything. And again, I think the best part is that you never have to stop and wonder, what do I do next? You just keep getting to work through the lessons one by one. And then finally, step 5, module 5 is your launch, where I show you how to launch your app to the world. And I show you how to deploy it. I show you how to associate it with a custom domain name. So you'll be able to visit, myawesomeapp.com or whatever domain name you choose before you know it. There is also another thing I want to mention. So there's also an option to join a private members only community that I run alongside the course. The community is run via Slack, and it's a great way to connect with fellow course students who are doing and working on similar things to you. They'll help support you as you work through the course, and it's a great place to be able to reach out to for help and to connect. And I'm also always in the community, so you can use it to get help from me at any time. Let me show you the different course enrollment options in case you're interested. All right, so there are 3 different packages. The first one is the course only. The second one is the course and the community, where you get access to that private members community. And the third one is the course plus one-on-one coaching, where you get an hour-long coaching session one-on-one with me, where we can work through a complete personalized plan for you. And I want to make sure you get lifetime access, so you only pay a single cost for any of these to join the course, and you get access to all the content forever. And I recently released a new round of updates to the course, but I wanted to keep the prices the same because I want to make sure that they're accessible so that you can enroll and start getting to learn this stuff as soon as possible. And today, as a special offer for attending this workshop, I have a 20% discount for you. So you can see that'll knock off $20 from the regular course, or 40 or so from the course community, and 60 from the course and coaching package. And that you'll see below this, there's a button. I'll mention it on one of the last slides, but there's a button that says enroll in From Idea to Launch. And if you use that button, you'll automatically get your 20% off discount. So here's just one more thing that another student, Chase, had to say about the course. So he said, I've literally tried every coding how-to course out there, and I usually sail right through them and then consequently feel like a genius. The feeling quickly fades when I attempt to go out on my own and code something useful from scratch. Alex's course is different. It starts by helping you come up with a project that you care about and then systematically walks you through the whole web development process. It helped me understand the why behind each function that I coded. And one more from Ronan. I've already achieved more than I could have imagined with this course. The fact that I have the skills now to go ahead shows that your teaching methodology really works. I feel like I've struck gold here, and I want other people who are in my situation to do the same. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. It's been a blast to host this workshop, and I hope that you got a whole lot out of it and enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed putting it on. So again, below this live stream in your browser, you'll see a button that says enroll in From Idea to Launch. And if you use that link, that button, you'll automatically get your 20% off discount. And just a quick note, the discount's good starting today, February 23rd, 2016, and it goes through this coming Sunday, February 28th, 2016. And with that, I am happy to open up the floor and answer any questions you have about the course or about anything else that we covered today, and do Q&A. All right, that's a great question. So the question is, how much experience do we need with the PHP programming language? The answer is none. If you have any, it will certainly only help make maybe some aspects slightly easier. But I really do make a point of walking you through everything from the ground up. So that's for example, one of the other reasons why there's that, why I do that module on the basic web application. We go through in that module, we go through the intro to PHP stuff. So I walk you through the fundamentals of PHP so that you have that knowledge as you work through the course. So I tried to make it as friendly as possible to approach, so that all you really need is, if you're interested in going from start to finish, building your own web app and learning these skills, you should be able to, and you put in the time to actually sit down and do it, you should be able to do it. So you don't need a specific amount of PHP knowledge or HTML or CSS. Sorry. I walk you through everything in the course that you need to know. All right, so another question. I might need payment gateway services in my project. So I think by that, it just means the ability to process payments. So e-commerce or something like that. Is this example included in the course? So there isn't explicitly a lesson on e-commerce or incorporating stuff like that. That is something though that both myself and or members of the community could help you down the line, once you get to that point, help you incorporate into your app. I'm also always working on improving the course and adding more content. So it's totally possible that if there's interest in that from a bunch of different people, I could certainly consider creating a module, an additional module to add onto the course to cover more advanced stuff, like, for example, payment stuff. All right, so another question on whether or not there are lessons on incorporating third-party APIs. So that's sort of I have sort of the same answer as the previous one on processing payments. There isn't a lesson specifically on that, but it's definitely something, again, that myself and people in the community could help you implement when you get to that point. And that would be another one that would be a great candidate also for an additional module that could be added to the course. So as you can see, I was just looking up Lumen. I have never worked with it before. Very interesting. I'll have to look into that more. It might be great for creating an introductory web app for a simpler course. So generally, though, what I aimed to do with From Idea to Launch was teach you how to build something fully featured. So the idea is that, you will be able to build and execute on your entire idea no matter what it is. But I'll definitely look into Lumen. It sounds interesting. All right, so another question. Can you use Laravel to build REST API services so that, for example, the web app could be used with a native mobile app? And the answer is definitely yes. Laravel has built-in functionality that makes using it to build a REST API very easy. It's, again, not something that I cover explicitly because that's sort of, as you probably know, if you're asking, a different way to slightly, at least, to go about building a web app. But you would still use the majority of the techniques that are taught in From Idea to Launch to be able to build something like that. And again, something I could definitely help you along with.